So I know, you know, um, this is a topic that I could probably go deeper in, but I wanted to stay surface level because we need some general understanding first, and uh, because with can we get a person from point A to point B if they eat more processed foods? It can take a little bit longer, but yes, we have in the past. Uh, but I will tell you, it can slow down some of the process. And I'll touch on that. So why food quality matters for energy, hormonal balance as well, because it can help eating the types of foods can help the process of obviously stability with hormones and then long-term health. So, you hear a lot about the quality foods, types of foods, and unfortunately, um, we and myself had really been in a generation of convenience. And as a child, that's when it really, when I was a child, that's when it really started taking off with the TV dinners and so forth and so on, and it just compounded. And we've seen kind of a flip where we've been paying a lot more attention as a society of the quality of food, where it comes from, how it's sourced, because we have to be better consumers for and big advocates of our own health as well. So, with that said, what are whole foods? Foods that are close to their natural state as possible. I'll just give you the general definition of that. Single ingredients or minimal ingredient foods. And examples obviously is going to be, meat, fish, eggs, fruits, veggies, potatoes, rice, nuts, things that are in, again, a more natural state. What does whole foods matter? Really, the essential vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients are important. Interesting part with that, Aaron and I this past year went a little bit deeper into our optimization of our own health. And with some of the testing, we went into the nutrient deficiencies and things. And it's quite interesting when you go that deep. And even though you may consume, a variety and a good amount of food, there's certain deficiencies that will appear, even though you do eat well. So that's just kind of the day and age we're in. So whole foods matter. They also support and really do a good job with supporting blood sugar response and appetite regulation. Those things are kind of pushed this to the side sometimes with the understanding of the impact of what they can do. Um, just one second here, and then improve digestion and gut health as well. Again, so many individuals we work with, struggle in this area, and we're exposed to so many different medications, chemicals, and things of that nature, and some of the foods that do disrupt our natural gut biome in our digestion process. So, whole foods can help kind of regulate that. And the cool part with that is we do have the technology nowadays to really address your gut biome. Again, Aaron and I went through that whole process, and knock on wood, we were pretty good and stable. But if somebody is really struggling with that, there are companies out there that you can do specific gut biome testing and actually fix if you do have issues. So never hesitate to ask about that. And then naturally regulate calorie intake will also be a side effect of the whole food consumption or consuming more whole foods. So with the hormone response, you hear me talk about this a lot. Protein's going to support muscle metabolism and really regulating your response to hunger. And that's so important, specifically if you're in a fat loss phase. And then the healthy fats support testosterone, estrogen balances and brain health. So, and a lot of times we have to maybe add some essential fats because we may not get them all from our natural, consuming of natural foods. So that's another area that most people in general, probably could use some type of essential fatty acid supplementation. Carbohydrates from whole foods support the thyroid response and cortisol balances. So again, that's something we don't talk probably enough about. And then we're going to jump on the other side, the flip side, the processed component, which we're inundated with processed foods nowadays. It's everywhere. It's convenience. I get it. Sometimes you do have to figure out your battles, pick and choose. Am I going to go with convenience right now, or am I going to go more of a holistic, whole food route? And that's going to depend on the individual and time, and there's a lot of variability in there. So when you look at the processed foods altered from their original form for convenience or shelf life, or you could even say marketing purposes for consumption, overconsumption, because there are some things out there that, for instance, some certain chips and things that we consume nowadays, or would you really consider them food? They have so many chemicals in them. The nutrient value has been displaced so much, and it's more about, is it more of a thing that we consume and go back and consume again? So overconsumption. And they're going to often contain added sugars, refined oils, preservatives, flavor enhancement, because how they're designed. They're going to enhance those flavors, and sometimes they will put additives in there to make them more appealing, so you do come back and overconsume them. It's part of some of the downfalls and pitfalls of the marketing component with what our food companies have gone to. Um, hyper palatability too. So you just overconsume them and won't feel satisfied. So some of the hidden cost of overconsumption or the processed foods in general is low nutrient density despite high calorie content. And this is where we really get in trouble, just in general, and again, some states put a requirement on calories based upon fast food restaurants and things of that nature, and or restaurants, so that way the consumer has a better idea of how calorie dense something is, because sometimes we just kind of take it for granted, and we guesstimate, and it could be way off, and then we overconsume calories fairly easy. So the other thing that what processed foods will do is it's going to disrupt your hunger and fullness signals. And many times what happens with individuals is with consumption of processed foods, they'll never feel satisfied or hungry, so they'll overconsume. They'll keep consuming those products. So that's where the cravings, the over eating, uh, come into play. And obviously, if it's high in calories, then it's a combination of things. So then we're really pushing our calorie consumption. And the other thing it doesn't do a very good job with is blood sugar stability. So you'll have a swing in energy and crashes up and down, and it does not stabilize your insulin response, which is so key for us in general to kind of control our appetite and help us stabilize our energy sources. Another thing that we don't talk a lot about is the inflammatory response of consumption of more processed foods. So the refined oils and sugars increase inflammatory marker points within our blood profile in our body. So chronic inflammation is going to impact your joints, digestion, and recovery. All those can, impact obviously how you feel, sleep, stress, and that can be a big downfall, because then if you don't feel well and you feel inflamed and you feel, you know, um, your digestion doesn't feel good, typically what happens, and if your sleep's off, we will chase food again, for energy. So it's a vicious cycle. And then over time, what we've seen and what they've seen was is it contributes to insulin resistance. So it can cause other problems within the system if overconsumed on a consistent basis. So here's kind of the loop, or what we've seen with the consumption of processed foods. And obviously there could probably be a rating system that we could put together on, how processed and how not. Obviously, in general, we want to give you the tools to look at something and say, okay, if it has X amount of added, you know, ingredients list, then hey, you may want to kind of stay away from those types of foods. But processed foods train the brain to seek constant stimulation. It's that loop. You get stimulation, you crash, you come back for more. And some of the, again, I'll go back to some of the foods and how they design them. They are very addicting, and that's for a purpose. So, makes whole foods seem less appealing initially. You may have to break some of the cycles if you're overconsumption of processed foods. It takes a little bit of time to break that cycle. You know, you got to kind of wean yourself off of it, or as you start introducing more whole foods and more natural foods and pulling back on obviously the more addicting foods, it's just like anything else. It's gonna take time and a process and um, your ability to make better decisions and have better foods available as well. So we want to jump over into more of the body composition, excuse me. This is a thing again, small and simple things that happen with whole foods. It's going to have a higher thermal effect from the protein source. What I'm saying there is it's going to take more energy, more calories to burn that food that is more whole in nature. There's a higher fiber content, more nutrients. So it takes a little bit more effort, specifically in protein, to break that food down. And so it's going to burn more, you're going to burn more calories to get the calories out of it. So you're going to have a better muscle retention during fat loss as well. If you're more utilizing more whole foods uh, in the process, it's going to be less resilience on willpower and tracking. Um, Now, obviously, we want you to track because we need data points. Because if we don't have data points, we're guessing most days. So, and you can look at it from this standpoint because again, we want to give you the tools to navigate as best as you guys can in your situation. So the 80/20 rule with this perfection is not required for the results, but with small adjustments in introduction and maybe the reduction of some of the processed foods, you're going to start feeling better, less inflammation, better gut health. And then if we can get 89% of intake from whole foods, it's going to just accelerate your process of what you're doing in the other areas. What I'm saying is your sleep, your stress management, your resistance training, your movement is all going to get it just accelerates everything. It makes everything easier. And what you want to look at is use processed foods strategically, not from an emotional standpoint or to try to fill a gap. Um, Now, what I would say is I use processed foods to help with because you would say, hey, a protein bar and/or a protein shake is going to be more of a processed food. Now, obviously, we want to try to get a better source of that product, less ingredients if we can. Um, but I do consume processed foods. It's minimal, but there is time and place for some of those, and you got to choose your battles and make sure that it's kind of moving the needle forward and not hindering the process. So here's some simple strategies. Build every meal around a protein source. You guys always hear me talk about that. Choose carbs that look like food, not products. So carb sources, and we always get caught up with this, is we think carbs have to be bread, rice. Most of our carbs, and again, we do consume bread, but it's more in breakfast. In other times, it's minimal. If I have a sandwich here or there, but a lot of the times our carbs are going to come from more vegetables, and that's where we get most of our carbs from. So you want to, try to start training yourself to choose carbs that are higher in nutrient density and fiber because, again, the higher fiber is going to help with stabilizing insulin response, digestion, break, and it takes longer to break down. So you want to minimize or limit foods that come in, boxes with long ingredients list, right? Because you're going to be consuming more of the chemical makeup of that, and it depends on what they're putting in that. Depends on what type of food it is, obviously. Focus on consistency over intensity. So, again, if we're about 80% there, we're going to, again, move the needle forward. There's going to be times and places where you're going to consume more processed foods. That is what it is. It's just, we want to try to educate you in making better decisions in the process because it's going to accelerate what you're doing, but it's also going to help with some of the responses. What I'm saying, hunger responses, insulin, inflammatory responses, gut health. So, um, whole foods are higher, obviously, in protein, fiber, and water content, and they help with tamping down that hunger response, right? And the signals, and it pushes that out further. They also slow digestion and improve fullness signals. So GLP-1, that's some of the concepts of what that peptide does. It slows down digestion, and it tamps down hunger cues or responses. Your body naturally does that with better food quality, higher fiber types of foods. So there's a natural way to do that, but obviously those peptides really accelerate that process. So it's going to help support leptin and ghrelin regulation. That's going to help with your hunger responses. And then when you feel more satisfied on fewer calories without even trying, so that's the benefit and the areas that are really going to accelerate the process when you consume more natural products, our foods, more whole foods, I should say. And then again, what's going to happen with more processed foods? You're going to have that loop or cycle of hunger, and it can disrupt a multitude of things. So lower protein, um, they add fiber relative to calories, and the fiber is a lot of times if it's more processed, they're going to have to add fortified fiber if it even has it. So you got to look at that, from that standpoint because more whole foods, again, they typically going to have a higher fiber content, which is just a ton of benefit across the board. And digest when you consume a product that is higher processed, it can have that response of blood sugar, and then obviously leading to rapid hunger responses because it doesn't tamp down those signals properly. And the sensation of the fullness, there's going to be an override where you kind of cycle and I've said this when the American diet, and I grew up on cereal, and when you eat cereal in the morning and it's processed, right, and it's more sugar based. I remember doing this as a kid, preteen. I'd eat one or two bowls of cereal. And luckily, I drank milk because it had some protein in it. And then, man, I was probably hungry 30 minutes later, 40 minutes later. And as I got older and in college and stuff, I started realizing that when I started going down the educational path of this industry and learning more about food and how it responds. And then I added other protein sources for breakfast to kind of tamp that down because otherwise I was like hungry and starving by the time lunch came around just because of the quality of product I was consuming and lack of protein and fiber and then those cues and the spike of insulin. So it's going to promote constant grazing and cravings. Really, we'll come back to it over and over and over. So here's some of the advantages of the fat loss or that journey of fat loss with utilizing whole foods. So there's again some advantages I've already touched on. It's going to be a higher thermal effect from protein-rich foods, more stable blood sugar, like I talked about, because that's going to help with the signal of fat storage and utilization, fat oxidation. That's very important. Easier calorie control, so you'll feel full. So you don't have to consume as much calories, and then improved adherence long term because you get used to this cycle, and then you become more in tune with your body and the hunger responses. And then I'm going to flip it. Obviously, why some of the processed foods may stall fat loss. Again, calorie density, overeating easily because you cycle. Blood sugar, again, if we're messing with that too much, increases insulin demand, and it's going to trigger more of fat storage than fat oxidation. So, promotes inflammation, interferes with fat metabolism. Again, an inflammatory response is a big deal. And again, if it's causing some digestion issues, then your whole system's not running properly. And we want to make sure, and you want to make sure that that system is running properly and it's not causing you a lot of disruption because it's gonna slow everything down, obviously, and make you feel worse. And then it's going to increase your resilience on willpower. So you'll keep cycling back to that more processed foods, and that loop continues. And we're going to jump over into more of the muscle building or setting a good environment for muscle building. The thing, and we get these from food, but I also use a supplementation for this as well. Provide complete amino acids for muscle repair. That's a big deal, and that's why we talk a lot about protein, but essential amino acids is a big component to help set a better environment for muscle repair post workout, or just in general through a stressful day as well. It's going to have better micronutrient support, recovery, and performance because you're getting better nutrients into the body. Again, is it going to be perfect? No, we all are probably walking around with some deficiencies unless you take a deeper dive into that and then address them. It's kind of what Aaron and I did this past year. Support training intensity and consistency, and then improves nutrient participation towards muscle growth, and it's going to provide a better environment for muscle growth as well, muscle growth and repair as well. So if again on the counter component of this, processed foods is going to displace protein-rich meals typically, poor again micronutrient support for recovery, and anytime we dose up the inflammation, can impair training quality, how you feel, the intensity of the workout can all be impacted, just in general on how you feel as well. Leads to fat gain without meaningful muscle gain. Again, it's going to mess with your insulin response and set the body up for fat storage instead of fat oxidation. So you want to look at it from this point. Told you around 80/20. If you could start moving in that direction, you just got to do evaluation and what makes sense for you. Whole foods support the body. You want to build the muscle is going to be very important. Your recovery, your digestion, your insulin response. Processed foods prioritize short-term pleasure. Again, it's almost like those dopamine hits in the cycle because, again, spike of insulin, the hunger response is going to be sooner. So food quality before calorie math. So think of it that way too. Again, not saying you can't move the needle with some of the processed foods, but again, we're trying to give you a simple, easier strategy. Now, again, sometimes you're going to have to consume processed foods. We all do in some format at some time, but you just got to pick your battles. Consistency beats perfection. Again, lay out what makes sense for you and your family. When we talk about kids, because I know we talk about that a lot because we have two young ones here. It could be a battle. We try to get as much whole foods as we can in front of them. When they were a little bit younger, it was a lot easier as their palates change. Uh, those sit down dinners can be a little bit not so much fun if they're not consuming the food you make, and especially if Aaron's cooked a really nice meal. I think they take it for granted sometimes. It's all good, but I think it gets a little bit harder for some of them to eat protein, depending on the individual. But anyway, you want to present that across the board to the children as well. I grew up and I didn't really start thinking about food quality until later. I think I was probably I'd already been in the college and the performance um, of me and my athletics. And again, if I would have paid more attention, uh, I think it would have really helped. But having the opportunity for kids to have better quality food is important as well. And it's always a battle when you send them to school and then they're exposed to you know different situations where there's all types of sugars and you just got to pick those battles. But anyway, you know, you just got to choose which makes sense for you. Whole foods are going to accelerate the process, make it a little bit easier and faster. More process is going to slow the process down. That is there's just too much science behind it. So, with that said, what I'm going to do is open it up and see if you guys have any specific questions for me that I can answer. Yeah, if you guys don't have any questions, no worries. Never hesitate. If there's other resources you guys need, you can always reach out and we'll provide them. Specifically, when I went through and talked about inflammatory response, deficiencies, gut health, there's a lot of things that we can address, in that format. So I think with that said, if nobody has any other questions, what I typically do is just kind of go ahead and wrap it up. Double check, make sure nobody's hit that up. Okay. All right. Well, awesome. Hopefully you have some takeaways. Some of this stuff you guys have heard, right? And I'm just trying to give you an overview of how a processed food in comparison to a whole foods can impact, some of the components uh, from all the other things you're doing to move the needle forward. So we can make it a little bit easier, or we can slow the process down, depending on what we do with our nutrition. So nutrition is always going to be the foundational component. All the other things will help accelerate, and vice versa. So, all right. Any other questions? Nope. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys. You guys have a wonderful week, and let me know if you guys have any other questions.